I wanted to understand how our society is structured by race and class, but also how that structure has happened in a really subtle way that people no longer even question it.
Everyone knows that African American black people were already on the island. Everyone knows that already. His journals even say that. How you doing? My name is Alex Fabian. You guys already know me. This is my podcast. It's called Influence. This podcast where we get controversial on a lot of subjects that we talk about. So I have an amazing guest here today who's going to talk about a little bit about her experiences and who she is as a person and how she, brings light to a lot of the issues that we face here as Dominicans in New York or the U.S., in the USA. So without further ado, we have Dr. Saudi Garcia. Hey, welcome. How you
Thank you,
doing?
Alex, for
How's it
having
going?
me here. This is really exciting. I'm very excited to be here.
Of course. And thank you for coming. We've been planning this for such a long time. And we finally got it on tape. So shout out to, us finally doing it. So I'm very excited. Very excited. Are you excited?
Very.
There you go.
I did it 2 times.
Third time is the charm. Everybody who knows out there, third time is the charm. I'm a 3, so I used to pledge in a fraternity, so I used to be number 3.
I used to be in a sports team, and I used to be number 7.
Really? Well, 7s is in the back. You guys are in the back. But so 3 is my favorite number. But so tell me, let's get straight into it. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're very educated, you know what I mean? Which is a beautiful thing. You got a degree in anthropology, which is what? That's so crazy. I got a degree in business, so, pretty simple. But tell me a little bit about you and, what you represent now.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I am a regular Dominican girl. I'll say that.
Yeah.
The education, the degrees sit on top of who I am as a Dominican and as my culture. So I'm an immigrant. I came to the U.S. when I was 10 years old. And I have been able to benefit from so many opportunities in this country by so many people who've paved the way. So I am an anthropologist by training, which is a weird thing for a Dominican to be. There's so few of us. My mom, I have to remind her all the time what it is I do.
¿Y qué es eso?
¿Qué es eso? Eso es con los huesos. I'm like, kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of. So as an anthropologist, my work is to study social problems and how people think about, navigate, strategize, have historically navigated those perennial social problems. So the social problem that interested me when I was a grad student, I did my PhD at NYU, was a problem about race and color and resource distribution in Dominican Republic. So I wanted to understand how our society is structured by race and class, but also how that structure has happened in a really subtle way that people no longer even question it.
Yeah.
So in the U.S., there's a lot of questioning around, race and why is it that certain communities earn less or have less access to capital or resources. There is a different history in the DR. So I became really interested in finding a way to study how that shows up and how it impacts people's lived experience, literally at the level of their bodies, their cells, their health, these really mundane everyday things. Yeah. So I ended up studying the political economy. I know I use an academic word, don't judge me. The political economy of the Dominican Republic after Trujillo was assassinated.
Oof.
So that's what I studied. I wanted to understand how the economy and the state that we have now, the society we have now, has been influenced by what happened immediately after the assassination of Trujillo. And one of the things that happened was that the country was opened up for a lot of foreign investment after 1966. And one of those kinds of foreign investment was mining. It was tourism, and it was mining.
Yeah.
So I studied the mining industry because the tourism industry we know more about, but we know a lot less about the mining industry. So I was the first U.S.-based scholar to study the mining industry, the first anthropologist.
The first?
Yes, the first
Wow.
and only so far, actually.
Wow. Yeah, wow.
So that's the work I do professionally. As a person, you know, I am many things. I'm a community member, I am a sister, I am a godmother, I am, you know, in these networks, in deep relationships with my people. So
Yes.
you can ask me anything about that.
Yes. Yes, which is, I mean, the first time that I saw you was actually on the news. You were on TV. Yeah. It's the first time I've seen you. And you know, you were talking, I think you were talking about Haitian relations and Dominican, and I'm like, that's a person, one, that I need to know, and then two, I need to get to know. Like, I kid you not. Like, that's what, you know, sparked me because you know, being Dominican and, you know, also being, you know, my dad is half Haitian. So you know, just having these, you know, ideas and having these, you know, your background, you're like, what is this? Like, and, you know, being Dominican, we have such a unique, oh my, yeah, it's very complex. It's very complex. And so it's super important for us. I think it's more important for us to know who we are and where we come from more than anything else, because it's such a mixture of things, but it's also really straightforward.
Yeah.
You like, it's a mixture of things, but it's straight, but
Yeah.
you can't, it's not like we have a million, like there's, if I'm not mistaken, there's a few, you know, how about this? How about we bring it back to like the very, very, very beginning? So we're chilling in Haiti, you know,
Minding our business.
minding our business.
The indigenous people minding their
The indigenous, the Arawak people, Taíno,
us,
yes.
the Ciguayo,
Exactly.
chilling, vibing.
Wearing gold.
Flashy from the beginning.
Flashy. Yes. Wearing gold as we do because we know that, you know, our island definitely has tons of gold, and still does. So, but we're chilling, having a great time. And Christopher Columbus arrives to the island.
So you want like the full break?
I want the full breakdown, girl. This is why we here.
Okay. Great.
Because one, a lot of people don't know, right? Which is, yeah, a lot of people don't know. So we have to break it down. We're not going to go through the entire history, but let's get down to, you know, the beginning part.
Let's do it. I'm down.
And who best to do that with someone who studies this type of thing? So, yeah, we're chilling. Then Christopher Columbus came.
Right. So I will preface this by saying that as I was getting my degree, I also was doing a lot of activism. That was cultural work and cultural activism since 2015 with a collective called World Dominican. And then that transitioned for me doing work with Dominican women in a collective called La Sala, which was doing a lot of this decolonial and historical and healing work. And then that's how I arrived to Encultured Company in 2018, which is the organization that I lead now after volunteering for about 5 years. And so,
which we're going to get to. We're going to get to that because that decolonization is so real. And it's listen, it's a term that I've just gotten to learn.
Right.
And I'm like, that's so deep. Decolonization is so deep inside that we need to definitely touch base on that.
So the colonizers have to know what happened. So 1492, right? Columbus arrives. We all know he was lost. He didn't know where the hell he was going. He ended up...
Which is not true.
It's not true?
No, which is not true. Absolutely not.
He thought he was going to the Indies. He thought he was going far to the east,
Well,
India.
yeah, of course. You know how it is. That's why I'm so, confused in terms of when people actually used, how Columbus got to the island. Everyone knows that African American black people were already on the island. Everyone knows that already. His journals even say that. His journals say that on his second voyage on the way back, he actually encountered tons of Africans who were already there. Even the Taíno people talk about having things that African people brought to them and they traded with and that they gave to Columbus. And if you don't know, I have a interview with Dennis Febo who talks about this on my last podcast that I had. He's an incredible activist as well, based out in Jersey, actually. His name is Dennis Febo. If you don't want to check it out, check that out. But he talks about how there was a African guy on his ship who was leading him to where the island was.
There are a lot of very interesting things that happened before Columbus.
Yes.
Do
you believe that, though?
I have to do my research and fact check
Okay.
so I'm not gonna confirm nor deny. I am a scholar. I will fact check and I will find 3 books. I will find you the 3 or 4 books to talk about that.
Yeah.
But there are all the Portuguese were actually the first to navigate the coast of Africa and the first to initiate the slave trade. So there are a lot of, and also like African people have off the coast of West Africa have had very incredible, like they're just incredible navigators and incredible surfers. So there is like a oceanic history there that's really interesting, but I don't study West Africa, so I don't know all the ins and outs, but I do know that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, thought he arrived somewhere else and arrived on the island. So,
Yes.
the first thing that happens is that Taíno people are murdered. But, we also have this myth of like these Taínos, they were so gullible. They just traded like espejitos por oro, like they traded like mirrors for gold. But that's one story of indigenous, or one idea of what happened, one colonial like narrative. Indigenous people resisted in every way that they possibly could, including mass suicide to not be enslaved. And there was also a group of indigenous people on the island who were the Ciguajos, who lived in Samaná, in the Samaná Bay region, because people don't know, but there was a point in time where Samaná actually was an island that was completely disconnected off the coast of what we know as the Dominican Republic.
Wow.
And as the water receded, so as the water left, then it allowed for a land bridge that connects Samaná. That's why Samaná kind of sticks out like a pinky.
Yeah.
So there was a group of indigenous people in that area known as the Ciguajos, who were between Samaná and also what we know as San Francisco de Macorís, who mounted like significant resistance. So these stories of resistance are not told. But, indigenous people resisted how they could. Eventually, they either fled or were killed. And, the colonizers actually brought indigenous people from other parts of the Caribbean to fill in as slaves for the indigenous people that they had killed. So this is the history of, the man who has a statue in our main park is just a history of so much murder. And so eventually indigenous people the ranks of them are so destroyed that they actually end up bringing enslaved African people who arrive, and immediately as soon as they arrive, like start mounting resistance, right? Like exactly. The first mass uprising of enslaved people. Notice how I don't say slaves, I say enslaved people, because that is always like removed, like the humanity of these people was in 1521. So, 1521, right? That is like the beginning of Black resistance across this hemisphere, and it happened on our island.
Exactly. And you're absolutely right. And what a lot of people don't know is that, it is disgusting. I know quite a few places that have a statue of, Christopher Columbus, White Plains, New York being one on North Broadway. If you know, you know. That's a location where they have a statue of him. And I mean, and to be fair, I mean, he did do terrible, terrible things. Him, his brother, everyone did terrible things. But what a lot of people don't know is that the indigenous people actually died mostly because of disease. So they brought smallpox in and all those, European diseases that the Taino people had no idea of. They didn't have syphilis. They didn't have these type of diseases that killed them in large, large amounts. I mean, in the whole island itself, you had almost 1 million people by the time 1521 came. I mean, you're talking about less than, I think it was about 80 to 90% were already gone. So you have such a large amount of people gone within, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, it's horrific. It's genocide, as we know, and also we will not be able to recover like the way that those people lived, right? Like it's very, we have an archaeology, which is like the sister field of anthropology, where we have the opportunity to at least go digging for the caves or like go finding the artifacts, or like at least there's some traces. But Tainos, they had their own political identity, like their own political structure. Women could be leaders of cacicazgos.
Yes, absolutely.
And like the Dominican Republic now, it hasn't even had a female president. But before Columbus arrived, we had like female leaders who were like chiefs of entire like swaths of land and control resources and people and territory. So it's just like, think about like how we live now versus how they lived. Like, we will never really get the full story of like what it was like for them to organize our island in that way,
Yeah. And there's tons of, cultures that we still get from Taino. There's a lot of language in there. Where do you think the word barbecue comes from? Barbecue. That's a Taino word for, getting together. There's an array of things that we still get from them that the word canoe, there's just so many things that casabe, yep, absolutely. There's just tons of things that that they brought to us that we still keep to this day. So it's absolutely amazing. All right, so in 1521 you said, right?
1521.
So most of the Tainos die, unfortunately, due to disease, overwork, definitely. Horrific crimes that they used to do, bury people like alive with their heads sticking out of the ground so that the ants can just eat it's horrific things that were done. You cut off their arms if they didn't bring you enough gold. Just tons of things like that. And so that happens. So then what happens next, right?
So after 1521, between 1521 and I would say like 1780, right? 1780, there is a society that emerges on the island that is composed by like the Spanish people that arrived on the island, and then their descendants, which become known as criollos. And then you have like the maroon people who live in the mountains of like La Cordillera Central or like La Sierra de Bauruco. The Dominican Republic and Haiti, they have 3 mountain ranges that are pretty significant. And so you have people who lived in those spaces and also mounted resistance from those spaces. But you end up sort of settling onto this, like these small colonial cities. If you actually notice, like, going from Santo Domingo to Puerto Plata, you have that very important main road, which is called like Avenida Duarte or something like that, Carretera Duarte. So you end up getting these small cities that develop along that main road. We're still using the same colonial road.
I've been on there. Yeah, I've been on there.
We travel on that. That was the original Camino Real colonial road. So you end up getting cities like Santo Domingo, of course, which develops as like La Zona Colonial, but then also develops as a city outside of the city, right? It's like that Villa Mella, and Lomina. Those cities that we know today as Villa Mella, Lomina, started as black autonomous cities. And yeah, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You're like, whoa, yeah. Like, so the African people who didn't want to be enslaved and living inside the walls of the colonial city created their own cities and spaces completely outside of the mainstream. And so you have Santo Domingo, then you have a city like La Vega, which was known as La Vega Real back then. And then you have a city like Santiago, which is an important city. And then you have Puerto Plata. And then pretty much everything else is like more rural, small outposts. In the east, where you have Punta Cana, that was not known as what it is today. Back then, between 1521 and like say like 1865, that area was very forested. So there was a lot of commerce of forestry, so cutting trees. And people don't know this little fun fact. I am a Dominican history nerd, so you're gonna love this. So, have you ever been to Venice?
No, I have not actually.
But you know Venice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the city of Venice is actually built on wood that was exported from the island of Haiti, because that wood, when submerged underwater, becomes harder. It becomes like cement. So the city of Venice was built on top of wood that was exported out of our island. And, as this is happening, you also have Port-au-Prince, right? You have the development of this massive sugar agriculture industry on the eastern side, on the western side of the island.
Absolutely. But before we get there, right?
Okay.
Before we get there, because I know you can, break it down scientifically and all that good stuff. But before we get there, we have to talk about, the slave trade.
Yes.
That imported. So once all the Taínos were either murdered or came off with diseases and things of that nature, you had an influx of tons and tons of Africans who come to the island, right? And this is their new home.
Yes.
Right? This is their new home. They don't know nothing else but what the Spanish have pretty much brought them to the island. So can we talk about a little bit of how that changed the demographics of the island pretty much forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people think that they got there, the French did tons and tons of trading, which brought tons and tons of Africans to Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't talk about the implications of it. We don't talk about how that changed pretty much the history of the entire island forever, even till this day, right?
Yeah. So in terms of the demographics, you have this, what I would consider almost like a white flight. Once the Spanish, like in the 1600s, discover, there's actually more profitable places to go pillage, steal, and destroy. A lot of the colonists who originally landed moved out to Mexico or Peru, or like just these like places that became more lucrative. And so you have this like small population of white Spaniards who end up staying and like settling in all these towns, and they kind of like form their own social class, but they're a very small percentage of the population. Some of them end up, I have to say, like raping and, procreating with the enslaved African people that have been brought over. And so you have this population of mixed race people. So you end up having a population of like African people who are from the continent and who, stayed within their communities. Then you have this like mixed population that, also includes some of the indigenous people who survive and their bloodlines. And then you have this like really small kind of upper class colonial Criollo and Spanish descendant elite that by all means like tries to hold on to power historically, and we'll talk more a little bit in the future about what that looked like. So that's sort of like the demographic makeup. And there is still slavery. So it's like there are many people who were, manumitted or who freed themselves, who just like left. But you still have bondage, like you still have slavery up until 1822.
Exactly. And, one of the things that I think we need to talk about if we're staying on to, that period of time, is, I think, one of the most important times in which I think the game changed and everything changed. And we have to talk about the splitting of the entire island, which was, a lot of people don't understand. Is so monumental. And in order for you to understand what's happening in Dominican Republic and Haiti, you have to take it back to that period of time, because that's when everything changed. And we're still dealing with the consequences of that split now.
Yeah.
Because one thing that, like I said, when I was having this conversation with Dennis, is that he said, what makes you think that someone who is from Haiti can't go to the other side of the Dominican Republic? Isn't that their side as well? And vice versa. Who said that someone from Dominican Republic can't go to Haiti? And be who decided to split the island when it comes down to that? And why do people care that they split the island? But it's so profound. It's so profound. In terms of the meaning behind it, the implication behind it. And it literally changed history for us, because it made it super, super difficult, one, to understand each other, and then two, to almost get along with each other, because there's two different languages, there's two different cultures within that. So can you talk a little bit about
Yeah, I can. So I would say that the border is a process. It's not just like a physical thing. I think people sometimes misunderstand, because we're so used to seeing like lines on a map, and then like that means that it's like a wall or something. But bordering a nation, creating a border, is actually a process. And I think another concept to wrap our heads around is like the border is a technology. And I'll kind of get to the second part, the border as technology, but let me get to the border as process. So I would say that there are two moments of bordering that were really significant. And notice how I said bordering as a verb, like as a thing that you do. So one moment of bordering was, of course, the Treaty of Ryswick, which is what you're talking about. I believe it was in 1697. I believe the context of it was like Spain and France were beefing, and they were like, you know what, like let's like settle this out by just like dividing this place, and you get this part, you get this part.
Well, the French were pirates, so they kept on pretty much fucking with the Spain. Yeah, with Spain.
Yeah.
So they were like, I'm gonna come here whether you like it or not, and then you just have to accept it. And then Spain was like, you know what, leave us alone. You you can have the other side. Just leave us.
Just stop doing what you're doing.
Exactly.
And that's how it happened. So that was one moment, but even as that happened, it didn't necessarily mean that people kind of stuck to that. Like, first of all, the borderland regions were not particularly populated. Like, even today, if you go to places like Restauración, or you go to anywhere else, kind of like Pedernales, or like, you go to these areas and you're like, who lives here? Like, Dominican people and Haitian people definitely live on either side, but it's a very depopulated area. So you can imagine how depopulated it was back then. And so it's not like everyone was going to be like, yeah, there's a border. Like, oh yeah, of course. People still kept going back and forth. And that actually is the reason why the second moment of bordering happens, which is when Trujillo in 1937 decides to assassinate, murder, massacre the people who are part of those borderland communities, because this Dominican state was not successful historically since the Treaty of Ryswick in establishing what would be like a division. So because it's the 1937 massacre happened because of the fluidity of the border. And I actually want to add a third moment of bordering, which is actually happening right now, because the Dominican government, with support from the U.S. government and the Israeli government, is employing the same kind of bordering technologies that are used in Gaza and are used in the West Bank to create this massive surveilled, technologically, controlled border. So again, bordering is a process. It's not just like you draw a line in the sand and then everybody sticks to that.
Yeah. It's a lot. I mean, they're trying to build a wall, you know, in like they are in Mexico, like, so I saw that and I'm like, interesting. I mean, you speak about Trujillo, which is, another thing in itself, whose grandmother
She was Haitian.
was Haitian, for you guys who don't know that. That's a real fact.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another conversation in itself, when it comes down to that. But you're absolutely right about about the bordering, and there's a river that separates us, and you can see, you can see, as you were talking about the burning of the wood and the chopping down of trees, you can see that one part is lush green, and then the other side is barely no trees, barely nothing. If you look at the border, which is kind of tough to understand, but all that was designed. It was designed for that. They did that on purpose. And a lot of it also, when it comes down to it, was done out of necessity sometimes because, people needed the wood to burn to do whatever it is that they needed to. So it's kind of tough. All right, so we're at that point where, they split the island. Now they're having a lot of communication, because this is like the iffy part, because the Haitians, they got their independence, in 1804, right? During that time period, there's a lot of war happening because the first black freed republic, Haiti, kicked out, and beat Napoleon's army, was considered one of the best, quote unquote generals. If he's considered the best one, what do you think, Haitian generals are? Like Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines and things of that nature. So, which we don't give enough credit to as it is now, you know. So they come in, and then this is like a tricky part within history now, because then you have Haitians who kind of want to reunite the entire island. Right. So you have a Spanish side, which is mostly mulattoes, right? Mostly, which is like, again, it's so important to understand that dynamic, because if you don't do the history within that time period, it's the reason why a lot of this is creeping up to us now. So when the French had their part of the island, they brought in tons and tons and tons of Africans, right? The Spanish kind of didn't do that. They kind of stick to still bringing in a little bit of Africans, but then they brought in a lot more Spaniards, and then they cultivated together. They pretty much mixed together, which is what you consider now un mulatto. You know what I mean? And we see this from slavery now, right? Even in the United States, you see that. No, it's okay. But even in the United States, we see this, where we see, fair-skinned people. And what happens is that, I think, right, when they don't get treated, the mulattoes don't get treated as an African does, because they're lighter skinned, because they have a Spaniard in them. So they don't get treated. They may get treated a little bit better than the Africans do. But still, that little bit better means that they don't have to go out there. They don't have to work. They don't have to be in those trenches. They don't have to cut down sugar canes and do all this other stuff, right? So they're treated a little bit better. Not just, they're not white, but they're treated a little bit better. And I think that dynamic from that point is when it all goes downhill from that point, because then the Europeans, they see a mulatto not as white, but they don't see him as black either, right?
Mm-hmm.
They see them as someone who's just like, all right, they're a little bit fairer, so they're okay. They're okay in their eyes. I mean, they will never be white. They will never be white, but
Mm.
they're not Africans. They're not dark skinned Africans, right? And I think that's where it really changes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that first of all, the history of the Haitian Revolution is endlessly fascinating.
Absolutely.
And I think we need, as Dominicans, we need to really study that history more because it's really complex. There are a lot of simplifications that happen in Dominican history that don't really give kind of like the full complexity of what was happening in Haiti and also what was happening in the DR. So I'll just kind of say that. I think that another critical thing for people to sort of consider is that the questions that we have now are not the questions that our ancestors had in the like early 19th century, you know? So the questions that people had between like, you know, like 18, maybe not 18, like 1780 to like 1865, like 1780 to 1865. That's like the time period that I want to kind of think about right now because that's what you're asking me about. The questions that they had were questions about abolition, and there were questions about citizenship, and there were questions about how to create multiracial nations where everybody had rights after slavery. So one of the fascinating things I love about this time period in our island's history is that we were grappling with these really intense questions that are still unanswered today. Like today in this country, there isn't a clear answer about how to have a multiracial nation and republic where everybody has equal access to rights. And those were the questions that our ancestors were grappling with in the early 19th century. So that's the perspective that I come at this history from. Like, that's what they were dealing with as like the first post-colonial, quote unquote, post-colonial place in the world.
But do you think and that's a very, very great perspective. But do you think that it could be a little bit simpler than that in a sense that
No.
yeah, you don't think so?
No.
Where I think
You're asking an academic. The answer
no,
is
it's
gonna be
not.
no.
No, it's no, it's not that. Well, here's the thing. It's not that I'm disagreeing, right? Those are very, very important topics, multiracial, multiracial. It is a really, really important, thing to ask, especially back in those days, because everyone was very confused, right? It was because, I mean, the amount of times that Haiti took over the Dominican Republic, and then they fought off the Spanish, and then they fought off Haiti to then become the Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic was confused. Haiti was never confused about what the deal was. Haiti was always clear. I think that maybe we should do like a kind of like decade by decade kind of situation. Haiti was always clear that it was freedom or nothing. And I think we also have a perception that like Haiti has only African people who are dark skinned, but Haiti actually had also a mixed race class, because one of the things that colonialism has done is impose a racial caste system on our people and across our island. It wasn't just in the DR that there was a caste system. It was also in Haiti, right? There was an imposition that divided the people. And so the answer that the Haitian founding fathers had was, all Haitians are black. If you are Haitian, you are black. And that was the answer. It didn't matter what your skin color was, right? That's the thing. It's written in the Haitian Constitution.
Yeah.
Tout Haitien sont nègres. That's like the thing, right? Because that was their attempt to solve this question about multiracial nation but equal citizenship. Okay, well, let's just all be black. But I have Haitian colleagues and friends who look like you. and who look like me, and some who look fairer than me. So there is like that kind of like misunderstanding. I think in the Dominican side, the Dominican the Dominican Trinitarios, who are, by the way, very liberal, like they would be considered woke in the standards of today, they would be considered woke. They said, or they wrote into the Constitution, we want a nation where all people, regardless of color, are all citizens and are all treated the same.
Absolutely.
And so I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
yes.
But here's the thing though, because you'll get a lot of this, and trust me, I understand where you're coming from, but you'll get a lot of this in terms of, I think that it was more known, it was put out there more on the Dominican side, that to claim that you're not black, because someone who's fair skinned, it's hard for them to say that they're black because they don't look black.
Right.
They don't have a lot of ancestry that's possibly black. It's more Spaniard. I have friends who are very, very, very light skinned. I have family who are very, very light skinned. They will never say that they're black. And it's it's the joke that they have. Dominicans say, me no black, me no black, me no black. But that happens all the time. So it's kind of, and I would imagine that even back in those times, the same thing was happening.
It wasn't.
You don't think so?
No, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, right? Because again, the population in the Dominican Republic that we have now is not the exact same population that we had back then. What I mean by that is that for the Dominican population to look the way that it does now, there had to be these successive waves of white migration into the Dominican Republic. So those waves happen. There are petitions that are sent out by the new founders of the Dominican Republic around 1844 requesting white migrants. So there is a constant effort to bring in more white migrants to whiten the country.
Absolutely.
And you see that over and over again. And so I think that we have an idea of what the Dominican population that we look at today looks like versus what it was back then. It wasn't the same.
Yeah, but Juan Pablo Duarte himself, one of the founders, was very light-skinned. He had blue eyes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was 1840 when in 1844 that when
he was descendant of Spanish. He was
exactly. He a lot of people don't know he studied in Europe. So I honestly think that looking back, I don't think that there was a difference in terms of, I understand the whitening of it, and don't get me wrong, there was tons of things that happened even during Trujillo's time where he gave land to people so that they can come here from other countries if they were white.
That's called colonialism.
Yes. So I don't necessarily, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that even during the 1840s, and even prior to that, there were still tons of fair-skinned, light-skinned people who were on the island who didn't associate themselves being black. They didn't.
Yes.
They said, "This is not me." I think one of the reasons why they founded that was because they're like, we're completely two different people. We're completely two different people. You guys speak Haitian Creole. That's cool for you guys, but we speak Spanish on this side, and we're fairer skinned on this side.
Yes. So maybe we should go through the history, because I think the things I'm saying around questions of abolition, slavery, citizenship, they kind of make more sense in context, right? Because I get what you're saying around how do people self-identify? And a lot of that had to do with, again, slavery, citizenship. So the Haitians liberate the Dominicans, or the eventual, because they were not Dominicans at that point in time.
Absolutely.
They were, I like to call them proto-Dominicans. They were not yet fully cooked.
Well, here's the thing, which is true, but here's the thing too. I mean, even after the Haitian Revolution and, the Spanish side freeing themselves from Spain, they called themselves Spanish Haiti. So they even said it themselves. We're Spanish, but we're Haiti. Which is
Okay,
that's
well, let me
great.
tell the story.
I'm just saying, but that's wild to me, because then they knew what was going on. They knew, you know what I mean?
Well, let me tell
It's
the
like,
story.
no, I know that, but I'm just saying. But I'm like, yo, they knew it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So we actually recently did a video of this time period because we wanted to question the origins of the Dominican nation. So it's like fresh on my mind. I rely on a book by someone named Ann Eller a lot because that book is like really, really helpful in understanding. Just the first two chapters are just really helpful in understanding where did this country called Dominican Republic come from. Um, and there are other many amazing scholars like Isquella Lora who writes about this time period. There are a lot of really great scholars who write about this. So, 1801, Toussaint Louverture frees the east. I call it the eastern side of the island from slavery. Then you have this time period where the French retreat to the eastern side. So there's fighting going on. The revolution is happening. The French are eventually defeated in 1804, but they don't leave. They actually go to the eastern side to hide out. They hide out in like the Cibao. They recruit like Spanish descendant and Spanish families to fight for them because the Spanish families on the island knew that if the Haitians took over, that would be the end of slavery across the territory. And they didn't want that. So those Spanish families fought for the French. And there was a period in time where like the vibe was very French on the eastern side, right? Like 1804 to like 1821, right? They spoke French. Like the elite was like, no, we French. We want to be French because we want to keep slavery, right? The question was always about, do we get to keep these slaves? And so a lot of the decisions that white elite was making were rooted in the choice to want to keep slavery at all costs. And so that's why I'm like, we're getting ahead of ourselves with the color question, because the question that was mattering to people during that time period, to the elite and to the mixed race people, mulatto people, and to the African people, was, will this be a territory that has slavery or not? Because
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that was definitely the question. And of course, well, Haitians didn't want slavery at all.
No.
So that's what they stood for, the entire island. So
yeah, so eventually, people, some Dominican right-wing people talk about like, hey, the Huello de Moca, this like massacre, like this Holocaust that happened in 1805 in the town of Moca, and there's no historical record of that happening. And also, that was a military battle between the Spanish families that have fought on the French side and the French soldiers and the Haitian soldiers. And by the way, there were actually Cibaeño, mulatto soldiers and generals who fought in the Haitian army in this time period, which we don't learn about, right? One of them was Jose Campo Taveras, who was an important general during this time. And so that act, people were like, oh my God, it just shows how horrible. No, like the French had provoked Toussaint, and he went ahead and said, "Bet, knock if you buck, we're gonna come through, and we're gonna like get you guys out of here." And so what ends up happening is between 1808 and 1821, you have this like jostling for control between Spain and between France to try to keep the eastern side so that they could defeat the revolution, the Haitian Revolution. So actually, slavery gets reinstated during this time period of when the territory is known as like still under Spanish control. First it was under French control, then it passes under Spanish control. And what the people of color decide, right? People of color is both the African, black, dark-skinned people and the mixed race people. What they decide is like, we don't want to live under slavery anymore. Like, we're done with this. We were freed once. We want to be free again. So we're going to unite forces And we're gonna call on Jean-Pierre Boyer, who proceeds after Toussaint. They call him in to end slavery. And so we don't get to these questions, I think, of color and caste in that same way until we answer this question of slavery and abolition first.
Yeah, definitely. From doing my little bit of research, I've just learned that the impact of colorism has always been there, even when the Spanish, and especially when the French just implicated it more. They implemented it way more.
Right.
So, they made it so it was so put out there.
Right.
And they really distinguished the difference in class structure.
Yeah.
And they made it so heavy where even now, like I said, you still feel the effects of it.
Yes. So I don't want to downplay like colorism and the way that it wasn't just colorism, it was a caste system, right? Like the French were, like they really implemented a really strict caste system. The Spanish, their caste system was a little loosey-goosey. So it wasn't, they eventually tried to get something called El Código Negro Carolino, which was basically a black code modeled after the black codes in the U.S., which is why it's called Carolino and Carolina, right? So the Spanish attempted, like towards like the late 1700s, right before the Haitian Revolution, to implement a black code to kind of put people in their place. But by then, it was a little too late. Like people kind of did what they wanted, and a lot of people at that time period lived in rural spaces. They didn't care what was happening in Santiago or Santo Domingo. They were like maroon descendants who were doing their own thing. And so this question of color and belonging and citizenship really gets kicked up after 1822 and again in 1844. So now that we have a question of not just, this colony with its particularities as a colony, now we have a question about this state, this new nation, which is 1822 to 1844. So, sorry, it's 1822 first and then 1844. In the country that Jean-Pierre Boyer found, or like basically created, or like the territory that he governed, there was a clear understanding that Black and mixed race people were not below white, the 10% of the Spanish descendant population. First of all, many of them kind of fled because they were scared. So they were like, we don't want to live under Jean-Pierre Boyer. We're actually going to go to Cuba. We're going to go somewhere else. So a lot of them they left because they just didn't want like the idea of living under a Black government. But Jean-Pierre Boyer's government was a Black government. So the people in power were Black. And a lot of them also mixed race, like it wasn't just dark-skinned people. Because we make this distinction also. What they weren't was white Spaniards because, quite frankly, they couldn't be trusted. Many of those families have fought for the French or they supported continuing slavery. In fact, Núñez de Cáceres, he's a name that's very famous in Dominican history. He was a Spanish descendant person. And he tried to establish the first Dominican Republic. But you know why he failed? Why did he fail?
Why?
Because he failed to abolish slavery. And the Black people of the territory, including many who were organized into regiments, they were soldiers, and they had cofradías, and they had brotherhoods, all these associations, they refused to support that state.
Absolutely.
So our people, Black people, and mulatto people were like, we're not going to vibe with that. We actually want to be free. And if you're not going to give us freedom, we're going to call the person who will. And that person was Jean-Pierre Boyer.
Yeah, absolutely. And he ruled. But during that time period, right? There were from, like I said, from my, readings, there were a lot of things. Because what he tried to do, what Boyer tried to do, was reunite the entire island.
Necessary.
Yeah, that's
necessary.
I agree with.
Imagine if you had Spanish ships, French ships,
Yeah,
pointing their guns at your territory.
absolutely.
And, it was just like in the U.S. eventually with the Civil War. You cannot have a country that was half slavery or half free. You could
Absolutely.
not have an island that was half free and half slave
Yeah,
because it was a literal threat.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think of that as a necessary thing. I think it was very strategically smart. It was a smart thing to do.
Absolutely. But during that time period was the toughest thing to reunite, but culturally they were different, which is I think the part in which I'm trying to get at. Culturally they're different. And I think from my understanding, he tried to say everyone is going to speak Creole Haitian now, French. And a lot of Spaniards are like, that's not me. That's not me. This part doesn't speak that. Which, I mean, you see it now. What percentage of Haitians speak Spanish? It's a large percentage of them who know how to speak Spanish, who can have conversations in Spanish. There's not that many Dominicans who know Haitian Creole French.
Um,
And I think and the reason why I'm bringing that up is because back in those times, the same thing was happening with that. They wanted to create a culture, right, where Haiti, first of all, helped them to get their independence from Spain, but then was like, what the heck do we do now that we have this mixture of different people within us? Literally, there's a mixture of different cultures, and I think that's the most important thing now. And the reason why I bring that up is because it's so important. I asked one of my good friends, he's Nigerian, and I asked him, I'm like, why can't a lot of, these African nations just come together with one and trying to figure out? And he's like, listen, Alex, within Africa, there's thousands of languages.
Yeah.
There's thousands of cultures, yes, that come with it. And I'm like, and it's super difficult to try to link them together and try to be as one. And that's the reason why I'm bringing that up, is because I think the same thing happened within DR, where there's just different cultures within one. And if you're trying to teach someone how to do something, naturally, especially if, they're lighter skinned than you, which I think that a lot of, the issues that, Dominicans even have now, come from, they're going to be like, heck no. And I'd be like, heck no. That's just not me. That's not my culture. That's not where. Now, do I agree with that? That's a subject for another time. But yeah.
So every single year we do this. We always do something around February 27th. This year we decided to go even more in depth than we typically have. So we spent between me and my colleague Isabel, we spent like 7/8 hours reading different sources, books that I already had read, but then wanted to reread, finding parallel sources in the DR. And I think what I came away from that experiment this year, because I do it every single year, we do it every single year, was that when we say Dominican anything, we have to think about who is it that we're really talking about? Because we say Dominican, it's just I think that we know who is speaking. But what I've come to realize is that actually there has been a really small elite that is concentrated in Santo Domingo. And they were criollos or Spanish descendants. And their story is the story that has gotten told. Their story is a story that we know as quote unquote Dominican history, and even as Dominican culture, with some marginalized inclusion of Afro-descendant practices and culture. So I'm just trying to be really careful when I say Dominican anything.
Absolutely.
Because
it means so much. It means so many.
It means so many things. We need to start thinking about Dominicanidades, plural, Dominican cultures, because the Dominican culture that existed in 1822 in the southeast province of any of the DR, or in like, Samaná, or in like the Cibao, or in like the Sierra de Bauruco, like those cultures were not the culture of the people in Santo Domingo trying to make decisions like Núñez de Cáceres for the rest of the entire territory. So that there's that point, right, of the diversity of, and then necessarily the diversity of stories that come with that. Just because some practices have been, put underground and really like marginalized doesn't mean that they're not the Dominican culture that we talk about. So when you look at those practices like Gaga, when you look at 21 Divisiones, when you look at the food that we eat culturally, like a lot of those things are not Spanish and they're not of this like dominant culture. There's always like that dominant culture, and then there is like the subculture. So Black Dominican, Afro-Dominican cultures, and Afro includes both Black and mixed race people. Those dynamics have become subcultures in a dominant Dominican culture. And that's exactly what happens in that 1822, 1844 moment, that the narrative gets kind of hijacked by certain agents. The narrative that we know today, like, oh, Jean-Pierre Bouillet was just oppressive. He was a dictator. He hated Dominicans. He wanted to get rid of Dominican culture. First of all, there wasn't a thing called Dominican Republic yet. So there isn't a thing called Dominican culture per se. It hasn't kicked off yet, right? There are some sentiments of nationality that were beginning, but it wasn't quite there yet. Not until 1837 do you get a sentiment of nationality. And so any conversation about 1822 to 1844, the formation of the nation, has to start from that nuanced place, right? Because you could tell the story of the founding fathers in the U.S. You could be like, yeah, George Washington, he had wooden teeth. But then you're like, wait, he had teeth that he stole from enslaved people.
Absolutely.
His wooden teeth were not wood. That's just what we tell the children.
Slave owner. Harsh. Very
He
harsh.
took teeth from his enslaved people so that he could have teeth.
Absolutely.
So you want to tell the story from the perspective of George Washington had wooden teeth, or you want to tell the story of how he took the teeth of his enslaved people, and those people need to have their story told.
Yeah, but that's a very tough conversation to have.
I mean, we're here to have a tough conversation, Alex. Right?
No, I'm just joking, of course. But it's a very tough. It's because people don't want to listen to that. They don't, and I'm on that side where I'm saying we need to listen to that. People need to do the research when it comes down to that. They need to know that, during that time period, which is what mostly this is all. That, during that time period, a lot of the Spaniards wanted to be part of Colombia, in Gran Colombia.
Yeah.
Like, they wanted to be a part of them. And then Haiti was like, what do you mean you want to be a part of them?
Point. So, again, something that's going to disappoint a lot of Dominicans is that at every opportunity that the governing elite in Santo Domingo had to form a nation, they wanted to give the territory away to other people.
And my whole thing is why, though?
Because they weren't interested in governing a territory 90% Black people.
Exactly. And that's exactly my point.
They were not interested in that.
Yes. They like I said, a lot of it stems from now, where they don't want to be considered Black. They don't want to be considered that. They don't. Like, Chris Rock has a hilarious...
We're talking about two different groups of people. Before you go on, we're talking about two different groups of people. I'm not talking about the 90% of Black and mixed Dominicans.
No, not them.
I'm talking about the elite of our country.
Yes. Because Juan Pablo Duarte was an upper class...
He used to come to the cookout, though.
Yeah,
he has some good ideas.
True.
That's why they killed him, or they exiled him.
Yeah.
He has some good ideas. He can come to the cookout.
Absolutely. He was definitely woke in that time.
He was woke.
Yeah, you know what I mean? But
him and his little friends were all woke.
Yes.
That's why they killed him.
But he definitely was woke. But he was upper middle class, fair skinned,
Yeah.
elite almost within that realm. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
but that's so important because one of the founders of the country.
Yeah.
It wasn't like it. You know what I mean? Like that's what makes it so powerful. During that time period, because like I said, a lot of it comes from that. A lot of Trujillo's policies come from that beginning of that cultivation of that thing that happened.
Okay.
You know what I mean? That's what it is. Even like to this day, it hasn't changed. For somewhat, I'm speaking in general, but that's where Mino Black comes from. What do you think?
Oh my God. That's wrenching.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, that's human trafficking, first of all. It's a crime. The Dominican government has done almost nothing to stem the tide of trafficked Haitians coming into the Dominican Republic who are obviously desperate to leave Haiti because of the situation, the violence and stability. And people complain about the migratory issue in Dominican Republic. Migration is a human right, is what people do, right? And also, if you want to have a fair migration system, there are all kinds of ways to have that. The Dominican Republic is not interested in a fair migration system. It's interested in stuffing people into vans, trafficking them through the country, and then placing them into low-wage, low-paid, slave-like conditions so that it doesn't have to pay Dominicans the fair wages that they're owed for their labor. That's what this is.
Yeah, it's a tough video to watch. It's a tough video.
And this is what I'm saying is the truth. This is not controversial. It shouldn't be controversial because Dominicans know this. How do the people who clean their homes, upper middle class Dominican homes, who clean their homes or sell them fruits or wash their cars or build their buildings or bring the agricultural goods from the campo to the city, how do those people get to Dominican Republic? If Dominican Republic wanted to have less Haitians in the territory, they would have done it years ago. They're not interested in that.
Yeah. And the fact that they, you have people who bring them in for money, and then it's just a sick game, pretty much. So you pay someone to get in, but then you deport them,
and then they have to come back.
And you pay them
again. It's like a ping pong. It's like a ping pong.
Yeah. If you haven't seen it, I'll post it. Post a link on here, on the video. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting, subject in which it's going on to this day. We're
not gonna get there in this episode. We're gonna need one more episode.
Yes, we are. All right, we got part 2 coming.
So just to make sure, we are leaving it off at 1822 because we need to cover that 1822 period.
And it's a tough period to talk about.
Tough for who?
Let's just say it's
tough for who? For who was it?
Not for you because you're the expert.
But
so
no, it's not about that. For who? Back in the day, was it a tough time period?
When I say
some people did pretty well.
Yeah, when I say tough, I mean explaining that time period. There's a lot going on within that time period, is what I'm saying. That's what I mean by tough.
There was some good stuff going on.
There was some good stuff. There was some good stuff. Let me see. I don't know what good stuff, but
women had the right to vote.
Wow, that's amazing.
There was land redistribution to black people who had been formerly enslaved. Free black people.
Yeah.
It was so good. The going was so good that enslaved black people, formerly enslaved black people from Philadelphia and other parts of the U.S.
came
to the island. So it was good for somebody.
Absolutely.
It was bad for some people. It was good for some other people.
Absolutely.
So the question is, who is telling the story?
Exactly. And that's what we're going to get on in part 2.
Part 2.
Keep in touch, baby. All right. This is Dr. Saudi Garcia I'm your host, Alex Fabian. I see you part 2, all right?
Follow Uncultured Company for
There you go.
more.
Social. What's your social? What's your social?
At Uncultured Co.
Hey, there you go. You can always follow me at the only Alex Fabian. I see you next time, all right? Part 2 coming up.